Hopefully, after episode 1, you understand the crucial concepts of building a plan and a strategy that you can sustain consistently over a long enough period of time to get the results that you want. You're now playing these 6 life pillars like pieces on a chessboard. You're juggling your priorities effectively, and you're moving towards this destination that we like to call balance, which absolutely does exist. But things will still get in the way. Life ultimately happens. Life in real time. Things like the kid's mood, the meeting that runs late, the unexpected message, the tiredness, the stress, the atmosphere at home, getting stuck in traffic, whatever it is, and suddenly your discipline seems to disappear. You typically lose momentum. You start to lose that fire in your belly that you had from the initial results you've experienced. And then you do what men always do. You take it on the chin, you bottle it up, you brush past it, you restart, and you promise you'll do better next time until it all happens again. Sometimes even as soon as the next day. So you keep digging yourself into this hole, unintentionally, of course, but it happens quietly until one day you end up in a hole so deep that it's far too difficult to climb out of. This video is for you if you're a family-driven bloke, disciplined and successful in your career or your business, but your life keeps getting reactive at exactly the wrong moments and you feel like you're not living to your true potential. Now, after more than 15 years of teaching men to rebuild a real life, I learned this one truth. We don't typically break from a lack of desire or ambition. We break from a lack of anticipation and contingency. So today, I'm going to give you a method that's going to help you stay true to your potential, control the controllables, and have a plan when the inevitable stress and momentum destroying moments arrive. This is episode 2 of the series. If you haven't yet watched episode 1, please make sure that you go back and watch this one first, as it'll provide you with the context you need to understand my points in this video at a much higher level. Now, if you've watched the first episode, thank you for coming back. I guarantee that if you commit not only to watching all 6 episodes, but more importantly, take action and execute the points that we discuss, you'll be on the exact path you need to be on to help you live life on your terms. Now, if episode 1 was why your plan collapses, episode 2 is why the collapse keeps happening in the first place, and ultimately how to stop being surprised by it. By the end of this video, you'll have a simple daily strategy, something that you can do in the morning and then reinforce at night, so you can start living from the identity that you want, not from the mood that you fall into. I'm going to keep this simple intentionally on purpose, because as busy blokes, we don't need another complicated framework or novelty, a shiny hack that sounds good on paper, but something that we'll ultimately never follow realistically. We need something that we'll actually repeat consistently, because consistency is what matters. We all know that. In episode 1, we talked about drift or coasting. Drift and coasting is the slow pattern where you take your eye off the ball, it creeps in, it affects your time, your energy, your self-respect. Life happens by chance. We fall into the victim mentality. Life feels empty, directionless, and unfulfilling, and we end up in a deep hole that resembles societal norms. We never thought we'd ultimately find ourselves fitting within, but we do. Most men don't recognize it until they get punched in the face with this reality, and then they typically call it a bad week. But unfortunately, it's not a bad week. It's a predictable consequence of not preparing for the realities of a full day with a full family and a full workload and all of the responsibilities that come with it. So let's talk about what this coasting costs, because if you don't understand the cost, you won't change before it's too late. So here are the hidden costs that coasting creates. Number 1 is that your mental bandwidth shrinks. You're carrying too much responsibility, too much pressure, too much overwhelm until decisions get worse, and then you normalize them. Number 2, you reach emotional exhaustion, and then you become short, intolerable, grumpy, angry, quiet, difficult to be around, because ultimately your battery isn't being recharged. Your intimacy with your partner declines, not only because you're busy, but because you're not being present with her emotionally. You're probably lacking a lot of self-confidence and self-fulfillment, self-esteem as well. You start missing memories with your kids. And this could be because you're prioritizing other things, or because you're not mentally and emotionally present with them in these moments, consumed and overwhelmed by stress and low mood. Of course, you only get a limited amount of time in certain seasons of their life. And then ultimately those seasons disappear, they're gone, you don't get them back. Now, what's crazy is that on paper, you look successful, but inside there's that hollow feeling that you struggle explaining to people, like something's missing because your identity has been drifting and coasting too. And here's the problem. Most blokes don't build contingency into their day. That's the purpose of this episode. We're going to talk about that. They ultimately build plans, more specifically expectations around goals, targets, outcomes, and even people, but they don't build a strategy for the moment that their day goes to shit. So when stress hits, when the day does go to shit, you don't pause, you don't pivot, you don't stay true to your identity, if you even know what that is in the first place. You just execute on impulse, on emotion, you react. So you keep trying to do better, but you're repeatedly falling back into old behaviors because you never prepared yourself for the crisis moment to begin with. Now, you're not only losing discipline, you're losing control. You're also gaining evidence that you're becoming the man that you never thought you would be, the one looking back at you in the mirror. And it's scary, it's frightening. The longer you go without control, this hole I keep referring to becomes deeper and harder to climb out of. So what is this crisis contingency blueprint that I'm talking about? At its core, it's a way to, one, anticipate challenges and roadblocks before they even happen. Two, an opportunity to remind yourself of the identity that you want to embody. Three, pre-commit to what you'll do when that pressure or stress arrives. Four, execute without spiraling. Five, reflect at night so you can get better the next day and the next day and the next day. And it's paired with something else, which I call the pillar pivot, which we'll get onto shortly. Now, we're not yet working together, so I'm going to keep this super simple so that you can apply it in any context and situation. Those that I work with more formally on a one-to-one basis, we build these systems and strategies around their individual circumstances, their goals, and the situations that they face. But for this episode, I'm going to give you a simple loop in the exact order that you can use it, simple enough to do consistently, which, as I say, of course, is the most important thing. Consistency is what brings results. Now, step one of this blueprint is the risk assessment. In the morning, think about your day. Maybe start this when you're in the shower. In an ideal world, you'll put pen to paper, think more rationally, logically, slow things down. But I do appreciate that sometimes the house can be chaotic in the morning, and taking a shower might be the only opportunity that you have to sit clearly with your own thoughts. In this moment, think, what's likely to happen today? For example, what mood are your kids likely to bring back from school? What environments will you be in today? Who will you come across? How are those people? Where do you usually get stuck? What tends to trigger these old patterns that you're trying to get rid of? An example of mine is the school pickup. I drop them off in the morning and I've worked so hard in that journey to ensure that they skip into school in a good, happy mood. And I'll often just assume that they'll be in the same mood later on in the day. Not necessarily because there's a conscious expectation, but because I just haven't given it any thought. I've been consumed throughout the day. But then I pick them up and then they're tired, frustrated, and suddenly there's a tantrum that I didn't plan for. Now, it's not an unpredictable surprise. It's a predictable bottleneck that I didn't anticipate. And that's the problem. The point here is that it's important that you risk assess so that you're ready. You anticipate. Because in this situation, if my expectations are not met, I'm more likely to be reactive and not act like the calm, caring, loving father that I aspire to be. Step two of this blueprint is to describe your optimal avatar. Now, in this, I want you to describe the version of you who would handle that day optimally. Not perfect, but optimally. How would that man think? How would that man feel in that situation? What would that man do, even under excruciating pressure? This is where you remind yourself of your mission, your goals, A question that I like to ask myself in this situation is as follows. If I knew that I was being recorded on CCTV and I knew I had to watch that footage back, how would I have to act and behave in such a situation in order to feel proud and comfortable showing that footage to other people? Now, as a side note, I want you to set a realistic expectation or understanding with this. At the beginning, of course, none of this will feel automatic, and that's normal. In the early days, the identity, the behaviors, the thoughts, the feelings, the actions, they're not autonomous yet. Everything becomes autonomous through repetition and through evidence that you collect and store, which is why the next steps really matter. So step 3 is the pre-commitment. You pre-commit to a contingency plan or a plan B. You briefly visualize it in your own mind. And when a risk shows up, you try to commit to the most basic action that you've planned to take should the issue occur in the first place. It's so important that you keep it super simple. Step 4 is the execution. Here's the contingency. And if it helps, say it out loud in your head when it hits, if that's what works for you. Breathe, pause, try to remain calm, delay the action or reaction if possible. If you need to respond to someone, it can be as simple as messaging them or even verbally saying, "I'll get back to you shortly." Now, this isn't because you're avoiding them or the situation itself, but because you're preventing the reactive outcome. You're buying yourself time to think about a more logical and rational response. You're giving yourself a moment to think about the CCTV footage analogy that I mentioned just a minute ago. And importantly, don't overthink it. Your job is to get through the moment without spiraling, without reacting, without losing your temper, acting on impulse, so you can collect the experience and store it for reflection later. So step 5 is the reflection. At the end of the day, at a time that suits you, you answer the following 2 questions or phrases. Simple, very repeatable, highly effective. These questions, phrases, or requests are as follows. 1, you are to list examples of when you have been that person. And number 2, you're then to list examples of when you have not. That's it. And not an essay, not an extensive letter to my dear diary, just evidence so that you can get better on purpose and intentionally. You learn from your experiences. Now, let's bring this to life with the pivot pillar that I mentioned earlier, because your identity needs what we call transitions. You don't only need a contingency for crises, you need a transition for certain chapters of your day. So here are the moments that you typically pivot, specifically the ones that matter for a busy dad, partner, a disciplined businessman or professional. The most common ones, first of all, is from the school run transitioning to work. For me, Wednesday is mega hard and heavy. I drop my eldest boy off and then I don't tend to see him either for 2 days or 5 days, depending on the week. And when I feel that sadness, my productivity and effectiveness takes a hit at work because that emotion bleeds into my attention, and attention and headspace ultimately drives our behaviors. So before I go to work, following the school run, I do a pillar pivot. I stop, I pause, I remind myself of the identity that I'm about to embody at work and how I'll behave to honor what matters. The second one, a common one, is transitioning from work to home. Switching off is a skill, and of course it takes practice. I also used to struggle with switching off between this period, and that affected my presence at home. So when I transition from work to home, I don't just walk through the door and expect myself to be the best partner and father that I can be. I pivot. I perform this 5-minute task. And as I said, I pause, I remind myself of who I'm being in this next chapter of the day, because your family doesn't need you to be successful on paper. Your work, your job, your business is incredibly important, but it's not the only thing that matters. They need you to be steady and present in the room, especially if you walk through that front door and the house is chaos. The third important one is prior to alone time with your partner. Now, to be the best partner that I can be, I try and perform a pillar pivot before moments where my partner and I get some time alone. With 3 kids, it might not happen as often as we'd like it to. But if you don't pivot, you'll typically bring stress into intimacy. And it's common for things that you've bottled up to come out in words, facial expressions, and body language, even if you don't intend to. And that turns connection into confrontation. So the same pillar pivot framework that we used from the school run to work and then from work to home is how you also protect the relationship with the identity that you want, not just your intentions and expectations. Now, before I wrap up this episode, I want to share something that came in recently. I've got messages from Up Rebuild members, clients, who said that this strategy was a game changer and they wished they'd started doing it years ago. One Up Rebuild member said, and I'm quoting this directly, "It's also given me a kick up the arse to finally try and start using transition routines. This is one of those things I wish I'd done ages ago." Another one said, "Anticipating the rest of the day has been a game changer. I've been talking out loud about the potential outcomes of all scenarios. Although you will never think about all of them, even being prepared for a few outcomes means that I'm better able to handle the ones I may not have anticipated. It's been incredibly helpful and has put me in a much better headspace." Now, the way that risk shows up will be different for each bloke, each family, each job, even each season of your life. It's constantly evolving. And for those of you that I will have the pleasure of working with one-to-one more formally, we do personalize it even further. But for this episode specifically, your job is to just start simple and build consistency. I can't stress how important simplicity is. So you've now learned the sequence. Risk assess, describe your optimal avatar, pre-commit, execute with a pause, and reflect at night, which means you're no longer surprised by the unexpected moment. But here's the next piece. Consistency still depends on your identity. Now, I know identity is a cliche word right now, but trust me, you'll get a lot from this, so much. Because in episode 3, I'm going to teach you your identity anchor. Because once your identity is anchored, your pillar pivot gets easier, your standards hold longer, and your behavior stops being dependent on how you feel or are even influenced by other people and society itself. Episode 3 is where all of this becomes automatic, because who I am becomes your operating system, your method, your strategy, and it's autonomous. So click on the next video here, episode 3 of 6, and I will see you in there.